Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I'm a data scientist by training, so GIS and remote sensing. I actually did a master's in Monash, where those principles I learned. But then I was in the development sector for a number of years, working with a lot of eminent folks on the data part of it. And so I was with the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, a bunch of different places where I was working on collecting primary data to support some research agenda. I'm standing here as the CEO and founder of Kabadiwalla Connect. We are a for-profit social enterprise that works to integrate the informal recycling supply chain back into the formal systems. And the starting point for us really was to map this informal supply chain in my hometown of Chennai. So there's just 2 points of departure I think that's really important. The first is that there's a crisis in waste management in the global south. You can see that we're generating a lot of waste. In India, I think we generate something like 70 million tons of, urban India generates something like 70 million tons of waste every year. And 90% of that goes to these landfills. It's all, the formal system is really prioritizing collection to the landfill, and even that is really, really expensive. So there was a World Bank study which said that 20 to 50% of the municipal budget needs to be spent for effective waste management. That just shows you the nature of the crisis. How are we going to spend that much money? One of the big issues is that 70% of the waste we generate in our cities and towns comes from small and medium waste generators. So your houses, apartments, small businesses. So it's really disaggregated, but there's a lot of volume. So it's really expensive to organize collection of this material in a systematic way, in a single stream manner, and send it to the right place from the formal sector. And as a result of this, a lot of plastic, a lot of these types of materials gets into our oceans, waterways, things like that. Even though technically 70% of the waste we generate can be managed in an effective way. 50% is organic waste, which can be composted. Depending on the city, anywhere between 15 to 25% is recyclable waste. Things like that. So one important thing to note is that when people talk about plastic, and the global south is a big culprit in plastic leaking to the oceans, it's really only one of the municipal fractions that's being mismanaged. We have to think about this issue from the context of, how do you manage your municipal waste effectively in the global south? The second point of departure is the problem of informal work. And when you look at, it's really this idea that when the municipality, the formal sector, prioritizing collection to the landfill, even though that material is really valuable, that's the condition where informal work begins. You have waste pickers scavenging for materials, things they can take, that they can sell, that has value. And so informal work is a huge problem. It's not a marginal problem, it's a core problem we have to solve. 2 billion people work in the informal sector. The recycling sector is a very typical sector where you see this kind of work, where you see waste pickers, aggregators, all collecting material. And then a lot of cases there's a formal interaction where the recyclers, especially for things like PET, so your water bottles, these are all part of then global supply chains. So it's recycling and waste management is a very typical kind of place where you see a lot of informal work. So Kabadiwala Connect, our goal is really to reduce the amount of waste being sent to the landfill by working with recyclers, working with municipalities, integrating this informal recycling supply chain into that system. The starting point for me was organizing beach cleanups, actually. So I studied zoology in Chennai. Chennai, we have this big beach, like massive beaches, really, really beautiful, but super dirty. So when we were in college, we used to organize, it was actually a youth collective called Reclaim Our Beaches. And we would go organize cleanups, take that material. But very quickly, we would find that once we collected that material, we would have to put it in these municipal bins, and then they would be sent to our landfills. So we have 2 landfills, Palikarnai and Kudungiyur in Chennai, where these are actually marshlands. So these are like, landfills is actually giving it a compliment. It's like these open dump sites, And so we started really questioning this thing of, are we just moving waste from one place to another? This is where, for me, I saw waste pickers come in and pick up certain kinds of material in an extremely industrious, professional way. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they would come pick it up. And from my lived experience, I know that they were taking that material and selling it to the local scrap shop. when I looked at the academic literature on scrap shops, I noticed they were extremely underrepresented. So we all know in this room what a waste picker is, but it's hard to understand what an aggregator is. And what we knew before, so I always had this idea of like, I wanted to walk every street and map every single scrap shop in my hometown in Chennai. So what we knew before we did this mapping in Chennai was that there are a lot of waste pickers, about 1.5 million waste pickers across India through, the research says that. They were collecting 20% of recyclable materials. That's a massive number. Really massive. That's millions and millions of dollars worth of feedstock in different cities. There was also information showing that for the informal activity on collection was saving the municipality money, on average about 25,000 rupees per ton. That's very significant. But then the big issue is that waste pickers earn very, very little for the work that they do. I won't spend too much time on this, but there's a lot of research talking about how active and effective informal stakeholders are in collection and valorization of material. But one problem I found, was that the stakeholders, again, like I said, wasn't really well known. So we all know waste picker. So what I did was I took the 30 most cited papers on talking about the informal waste sector in India, and every time they used a name to talk about a stakeholder, I kind of mapped it. And so on the left is a Wordle. The more number of times a name came up, the bigger it is. And then on the right is a count. So you can actually see that most of the studies are focusing on one stakeholder, the waste picker. They call them collectors, waste pickers, waste dash pickers. But then at the end, there's this acknowledgement that there are aggregators also. So they call them middlemen, they call them scrap dealers. What I wanted to do was, through a census, really try to understand this supply chain of how waste pickers were collecting, but also I knew citizens were going to these scrap shops and selling material. How was all this material being collected, by whom, and then what happened to it ultimately? That was my goal. And we were lucky enough to win a couple of grants to do this first ever census of the informal supply chain in Chennai. So we hired a bunch of folks. We walked every street. Wherever there was an aggregator, we would ask them a bunch of questions. What materials would they buy? Where is it going? What kind of processing is happening to this material? What's the relationship between these different stakeholders? And where's the material ultimately going? And we developed this kind of classification that really was the foundation of the work we do commercially, which is apart from waste pickers, who we call level 0 aggregators. These are folks who walk the street, or they have a tricycle, they scavenge for material every day. They treat it very much like a job. They have a morning shift, they have an evening shift, they work 6 days a week. They would collect this material and then sell it to this kind of small scrap shop. They're called Kabadiwalas in Hindi-speaking states. They're called Kailan Kades in Tamil. It's all around. In Indonesia, they're called Lapaks. I think in Mexico, they're called Catadores. Like, the city acknowledges this business of scrap shops, but very little representation in the academic literature. These guys, small shops, about 100 square foot, they were material agnostic, so they were buying material, any kind of material they think that had a solid end destination. And then from here, the material would go to a level 2 aggregator, who's like an informal MRF. So this material recovery facility is a key concept in recycling, where material is bought and then it's baled. Some critical pre-processing happens to the material before it's sent across for recycling. And so we found, apart from the waste picker, we found small scrap shops who are consumer-oriented, so people are going and selling their material. And then you also found these warehouses, large 5,000, 10,000 square foot, baling this different kind of material, and then ultimately going to a formal or informal recycler. For me, this is when I knew that we had something. On the left is a map of all the level 1 aggregators we found in Chennai. So every dot is a small scrap shop that buys paper, plastic, glass, and metal. This represents untapped, invisible infrastructure that cities in the global south have for the circular economy. If I remove that level 1 aggregators, and I said, I could be very well showing you a map of ATMs in the city, or vegetable shops in the city. It's really incredible how they've set up their system, decentralized, focusing on where waste is being generated to buy this material. They would then sell it to these warehouses or recycling centers or recovery centers who are more, they're set up on big highways. They're in kind of pre-industrial, industrial areas where they would bale this material and then send it long distances. And yeah, it corroborated that thing. We found that through the census, we found that 24% of Chennai's waste, which is about 130,000 tons of material, was already being collected by this supply chain. A lot of paper, a lot of plastic, a lot of glass, a lot of metal. Yeah, really an incredible ecosystem that could be integrated for the purpose of the circular economy in the global south. Just to show you, one big thing that we found was that large recyclers really drove incredible collection rates. So PET, for example, you have these part of global supply chains. So they make PET to textile, which is then sold to Adidas and all of these companies that then say, hey, this is made out of 10 PET bottles and things like that. And the amount of collection of PET is crazy. So what we did was, we in Chennai, we have these two rivers, the Coombe River and the Adyar River. And so when you look at the wards along these two rivers, wards is the smallest administrative region, there's about 50 to 100,000 people in each ward. When you looked at the scrap shops within these wards, they were collecting, and when you look at secondary data on how much PET is theoretically generated. So in the wards across the Coombe River, there's about 110 tons being generated and about 100 tons being collected. In the wards in the Adyar River, there's about 130 tons being generated, 188 tons being collected. So you can see that there's almost this like extra collection, just shows the demand for PET. And as recyclers now are looking at high quality HDPE, PP, PE, we really believe that this is the ecosystem that's going to deliver that consistent high quality feedstock. Just an example of how PET in Chennai flows, and this is again in all cities in India. It's like you have waste pickers picking up, you have small households, apartments going and selling to the small scrap shop. These guys would do some segregation, they would collect more, sell it to these level 2 aggregators, who would then bale it, sell it to recyclers, who would then make yarn out of it, and then sell it across the whole world, actually. And so for us, the big question is, how can we collect single stream municipal waste while uplifting this ecosystem of waste pickers, scrap shops, and large recovery centers? We do it in a tiered way. The first step is mapping. These supply chains are largely invisible still. And so a lot of our work is with recyclers or development agencies, really looking at what materials are being bought in which regions and what are the end destinations, what's the pricing, what's the way it's being valorized, things like that. It really forms the core of how things happen. Now imagine also, like I said, 130,000 tons in Chennai. That is commercial work. So there's already a general ledger system being followed. So you buy it, and then you weigh it, you store it, you sell it. And so there's always this mass balance being adhered to, and everybody's focused on how much you pay per kg, how much you're selling per kg. So the second system, the second product that we have is all about a traceability system that uses this informal way of doing something, this general ledger system that they have built. It's completely different from what the formal system would use. So PET, for example, is called HDPE, and PP is called Bommai plastic. Bommai literally means doll. Karuppu plastic is black plastic. They have like this incredible informal taxonomy that they use to segregate and work with materials. So for us, the heart of our traceability system is looking at making sense of this informal taxonomy for the formal system. The third is on procurement guarantees. This is really important. This is a core business product for us, where big recyclers will work with us and give us, say, hey, you have to give us this material. You guarantee 100 tons of this quality every month for 8 years, and we'll give it to you we'll buy it from you at this price. You're allowed to go out and like raise money, do all of that kind of stuff. And then the fourth is really on the collection. So collection is still more an ambitious idea because it requires a lot of actors to come around. What if, those 2,000 scrap shops were actually utilized and their waste pickers were utilized for last mile waste collection? Can we get the waste picker to stop scavenging on the road, but actually going to the household and picking up this material? Can we get them to pick up wet waste for us? It's all really possible, but it's a complex issue to solve. We have a pilot in Chennai where for the last couple of years, we've worked with 1 scrap shop and 2 waste pickers to organize collection from 30 apartments. So we're trying to demonstrate that you can trust these guys to be your garbage collectors, and through this way build like a dignity in labor of how you work. The second aspect on collection is we're working on a smartphone app that helps people connect to their local scrap shop. So imagine like there's a scrap shop, every street or every 2 streets has a scrap shop. So theoretically you should be able to walk out with your recycled waste and sell it to the scrap shop. Initially we were very grant funded, but now more and more, as everyone's really interested in secondary waste, post-consumer waste, we're becoming quite relevant to the folks who are looking at the energy transition, like Shell, for example. We're being incubated by them to look at how do you collect waste in the global south, where you can't go to the municipality and get your feedstock. You have to work with these type of actors. Yeah, I mean, we're really focused on the global south. We really believe that this supply chain is unique. It's extremely decentralized. It has a very powerful collection potential, and something that maybe is an innovation that the global north can use. I mean, you know, for us, the first, when we mapped in Chennai, the first Kabadiwalas, when we asked them, when did you set up? They really set up in the 60s on the back of paper and metal. And the value of waste was recognized 50 years ago. It's really now where the West is really looking at a circular economy lens and trying to value this waste. So I believe there's a lot that you can learn from how this supply chain is set up in the way that you can organize collection. Yeah, I'll stop there, but thank you for your time. Sorry, I just want to show you, sorry, my bad. I just want to show you a quick video of this traceability, of how it works. This is in Indonesia. So the idea here is they already have their own system of doing mass balance of a general ledger system. So using a point of sale device and a Bluetooth weighing scale, you can go into these big MRFs, serious business, 50 tons, 100 tons a month is what they sell. And you can create the conditions for digitalization in these places. And you can actually, once you digitalize this informal supply chain, people start seeing the value, how effective it is, how much interactions are really happening, how much value it is. So I guess one of the ending point I wanted to say was this idea of how do you scale these small interventions and make it really big and like transfer it to different places. I think data and digitalization is really key, and we really need to focus on all these informal processes that are happening. I think what we've unpacked in the waste management supply chain is also true of coffee supply chains. It's true of a lot of supply chains where there's a lot of invisible but extremely effective and active work that's happening in the global south. And once you use data and digitalization to actually show how active things are, then people will start to believe in it. So yeah, this is just to show you how it's not so hard if you come with the right value proposition to do something that people consider extremely technical. Like the EU is really looking at a digitalization policy, for example. Yeah. And it might be easier to actually digitalize in these supply chains than in these big centralized supply chains. So the QR code is critical. You can actually take a QR code and put it in every bale, and then every bale will then give you where it's come from, which scrap shops were active in it, which waste pickers were active in this process, and things like that.